And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 133rd episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, March 17, 2020, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. On the docket for tonight, we're going to basically react to one very wild week, not just in the sports world, but the entire globe. And then we'll talk a little bit about some actual very relevant recent news that Indiana just officially hired their new athletic director to replace Fred Glass. So we will get into that a little bit later as well. But here with me tonight, Nathan, due to all of the just the whole situations and everything that we're about to get into, he left his microphone and a lot of his podcasting supplies back at Indiana. And of course, Indiana is now shut down in-person stuff for the rest of the semester. So he is not here tonight. We're going to try and get him back on the next couple of weeks. So it's just me and Matt. But how are you doing in a very crazy world right now, Matt?
Crazy world is, to put it lightly, for sure. When we did this podcast 1 week ago, last night, if you told me how this is how things would go down, it would have been crazy. If you would have told me that 24 hours later we'd be looking at the NBA shutting down, I would have thought you were crazy. But and maybe slightly forecasting ahead of schedule. But no, here we are. I mean, last Wednesday night is one of those moments where we'll look back on it like 20 years from now. I'll remember exactly what I was doing on that Wednesday night. There's not many things that I've been alive for that. I mean, 9/11 happened, but I was like 4 years old. I was in preschool, so I don't really remember that. Yeah, I don't really remember that. I remember Michael Jackson dying. I remember where I was at when I heard that. I remember Osama bin Laden being killed. I remember when that happened. Yep. There's not many other things you can really think of off the top of your head, big moments like that.
Moments, yeah.
But when the NBA got shut down, Rudy Gobert had it, and then Tom Hanks had it, and everybody's kind of just collectively went, "Oh crap, this thing is for real." I mean, like, I'm not laughing because it's funny, but just because that's just
it all happened really fast.
It just happened so fast, and it's just so, and not just awkward, but it's just like it's
different. It's not something we're used to.
No, I mean, this is an unfamiliar feeling. We're coming on here, and 1 week ago we're like, all right, we're gonna be projecting the tournament. It's all gonna be happy, good times, and now we're like, what tournament? The Big Ten tournament. We're the winners of the Big Ten tournament.
Technically, so yeah.
It's so crazy, man.
Let's preface all of this by, first of all, even if like we talk about just personal things that we're like, this is kind of affecting our personal life. Nothing is as important as those who are actually physically affected by this, especially those.
Absolutely.
So we'll preface a lot of that, and these are just kind of our thoughts and feelings, and going through maybe highlighting more of the sports aspect of this and not diving too much into other things. But we're going to talk about our reactions, and I apologize for, I was about to try and apologize for that. I have a bit of a head cold right now. I'm good. There's no fever or anything, just a head cold, so I'm a little bit scratchy and stuffy, but I have been self-quarantining and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, last Tuesday we were talking about Indiana needing just how long ago was that? Indiana needed this is setting up last Tuesday night. And of course, many of you that listen to the podcast, I'm not sure when you listen to the podcast, but honestly, I'd be very interested to hear when you listen to the podcast and when that time was, whether it was Wednesday morning, Wednesday night, Thursday, or Friday or Saturday. I know sometimes my podcast will get queued up if I have something busy going on. Maybe you didn't get to it until like a couple days ago, and then it's kind of like a lot has happened in the past couple of days, to say the least. But
so much.
Indiana was going off of, think of it, last Tuesday. Indiana had lost 3 of 4 games, even though we talked about it was kind of a little different feeling. They at least were in most of those games, and they needed a big win against Nebraska. And boy, that's the thing that's always going to get overlooked, is that Indiana was able to really take it to Nebraska, which is awesome, and no one's really going to talk about that ever, but they were able to not just win, but win big. They won by 25 points. It hasn't happened in a pretty long time this season, and they, of course, Nebraska is not a great team this season, but they're still a Power 5 team, and Indiana was still able to take it to them and not let up. And then, of course, that got lost pretty quickly, because in the middle of it, it was almost like And not to make fun of it at all, I don't mean that way at all. But when Indiana was playing a basketball game, that was also when Kobe, the news that Kobe died came out,
Yeah.
and then it was
Yeah.
basically the same news during IU playing Nebraska that the NBA suspended their season after, like you said, Rudy Gobert tested positive. So it was the Indiana playing basketball during the start of sports shutting down in the entire, at least the country, because other countries in the world had shut down previously, but at least this entire United States country starting to shut down basically during the middle of this IU basketball game. And that's where it was on Wednesday. And then, of course, if you're listening to this on Thursday, just listen to just a few of the things sports related, not even just real world related, that was canceled. The conference tournaments were canceled. Of course, later that day, the NCAA tournament was canceled, both the men's and the women's. But that's not all that was canceled in the NCAA. They not only canceled winter championships, so like again, like wrestling, swimming, and diving, all that was coming up pretty soon. They canceled all spring events. So think of those baseball and softball teams, and golf finishing up, because I know that's sort of kind of a year-round thing. Tennis, water polo, a bunch of teams, they didn't even get to do much of their season at all. Then you go over to the professional world. The MLS was canceled. The NHL, the MLS was postponed more or less. The NHL was postponed. The XFL canceled the rest of the regular season games, but I don't know if the XFL is going to be able to finish any playoffs that they had this year. More of the PGA Tour, the rest of the Players Championship was canceled. Then you go into Friday, if you were listening to our podcast last week on Friday, and boy, did our news get old very quick. Premier League went away. The most racing leagues, and I don't want to list all of them, but there were a lot of racing leagues, including like NASCAR, basically, that postponed everything. The Masters is officially canceled. You get into even stuff that was happened today, like the Kentucky was postponed until December 5th.
Yeah.
So think about the Kentucky Derby happening early September. It's just going to be very weird when it comes to
First
September.
time in 75 years it's not in May. So.
Exactly. And then the Copa America, for more relevant, was postponed until next year, as well as the Euros next year. And then you even get into more IU specific things with Indiana classes, like we said, all in-person classes being suspended for the rest of the year. And I just was trying to see, I haven't gotten to look it up yet, but I saw like somewhere, I think Kansas has even closed all like public schools and everything for the rest of the academic year. And it's
Florida just closed all public schools for the rest of the year. They're going completely online.
Yep.
Starting in April. So they were prolonging spring break until April. So the high schoolers here are going to be in school until July. So when do they start the next school year? Like, there's so many problems and issues and timing, schedule stuff that is coming up because of this. But that should be the least of our worries right now, because everybody's personal health should be obviously foremost in everybody's mind. That means obviously practicing social distancing. I'm not here to lecture you on public health stuff. I am not an expert. We're not experts. So please go to look at people who are experts. Well. There's a really good Joe Rogan podcast where he has a guy on from the Center of Disease Control Studies and Policy, who does a really good. So I would highly recommend that if you're looking for another podcast to listen to. Of course, CNN, Fox News, whatever, they're probably going to be a better choice for that than us friendly people at the Hoosier Sound. However, please, whatever your government is telling you to do, whatever the state's telling you to do, whether it's in Ohio, where I don't think you're allowed to go out. The restaurants are closed. And
that's a lot of places now. The restaurants are starting to be
Francisco, whatever it is. Make sure you follow those guidelines. Also, support your small businesses when you can. I know the Assembly Hall has been huge about this online. So if you want to go check out any of their tweets, they've been tweeting about it constantly. Yeah, gift cards, whatever. Just support be a neighbor. That's what I'm trying to say is be the best neighbor you can possibly be. Let's band together like we always do in tough times as Americans and try to get through this. So
yeah, and I also don't want to like overstimulate, because of course since last Tuesday this was kind of like a blip on everyone's radar, like it was something that was happening and starting to happen, but it really didn't ramp up until the end of the week after our most recent podcast, which means we're kind of at the end of the news, unlike the Christian Lander news, where we were literally smack dab the be able to break it out on air. So
Right.
we don't want anything to become stale, because I know this has been a topic on everyone's mind all the time, because most places, everyone's work, most people working are, the majority of folks are, it's changed. Like everyone's work status, working from home, like you said, social distancing, which is at least a nice aspect of this podcast, is we're already social distanced. Like the podcast, Matt is in Florida when we record it. I'm in Virginia. Nathan's usually in Indiana. So at least that can stay the same, and which is the great about technology and why we can actually work from home from now. But
Thanks, StreamYard.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, sports has been canceled a little bit, and not only that, but I mean, you've got even personal things. Like I don't know how you've been able to handle things, Matt, but like you're coming to my wedding in a few weeks, and we honestly don't even know. We don't even know if that's actually going to be a thing that's happening in about 2.5 weeks from now. We're trying to find some backup plans if that's going to be a thing, and I'm gonna keep our people posted on that. But it's been a crazy 7 days for sure, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm praying for your wedding right now, because I know Washington's thinking about closing their borders, or they have already, to the state, which is insane. And if that happens nationwide, then there's absolutely no way I'm getting from Florida to Indiana without having to cross over a border that's going to be closed. So hopefully I'll get there. But yeah, praying for your wedding right now.
Yeah, thanks. It's all something that we're all obviously trying to work through. But sports. Let's talk a little bit about sports. And
Let's do that.
I know there's not necessarily much to talk about, because we're not an NFL specific podcast, so we can't talk about the 1/2 methods of sports that are actually going on. You could talk about UFC, how Dana White is going to keep pushing through no matter what with the UFC. And then there's the NFL, that it's all happening basically. To sum it up, basically they're able to do this social distancing because it's just free agency, which is of course blown up since then. But I don't know about you, Matt. I was kind of, and again, like we said, we prefaced this last week, not necessarily for the circumstance, but I was really interested to watch a basketball game, since at that point, the Big Ten tournament was probably going to be played just with fans. That had been going through Wednesday night, but we talked about on the podcast last Tuesday. Again, not from the circumstances, but I was going to be really interested to watch a basketball game without any fan noise, with all that background noise, to kind of see what extra things the coaches and the players were doing and yelling, with hopefully whoever's going to do whoever does the bleep buttons on live TV is going to have their work cut out for them with some of them. But I was really interested to see, and we'll probably see it in the NBA at some point whenever the NBA is able to come back, because I assume sports coming back is at least going to start with no fans. But I was going to be really interested to see with just how sports was working when there was no fans, and all those intricate ins and outs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the NBA is not coming back for at least 2 weeks. I think they said till the end of April they're not coming back. But today Kevin Durant was just diagnosed with it.
That 8-week CDC 50 rule thing. They're taking a recommendation, not a rule, but they're at least taking that 50-person thing a little more seriously.
I mean, that's on top of the fact that Kevin Durant and 3 other Nets players got it today.
Yep.
So Nets are going to be able to play for at least 2 weeks. So yeah, I mean, everything's canceled. I wish, we'll bring this back to IU basketball and college basketball. I wish they hadn't outright canceled the NCAA tournament. I get why they did it.
Yeah.
I wish they would have postponed it.
Even for a week, just to see a little more. Because, I mean, even if they cancel it this week, I feel like everyone would have been like, makes sense. But at least at the time when it had come out, you're right, it felt like it was almost a little too much right away.
And I know, I get the whole logistics thing is so hard to figure out, but I'd be down to watch the NCAA tournament if it was played in high school gyms. Like, there's a 7,000 seat one in Indiana. You can just move if they're going to play games in Indy. You can just move, or Dayton. You can just move it to Indianapolis, where there's plenty of high school gyms that would have hosted, that would have had fine television spots.
I bet every state has at least a couple high school gyms, maybe not 7,000, but at least enough to get a space and even a little bit of a crowd if they wanted a crowd, or just no crowd at all. Just make everyone just no crowd, just to make it a little more consistent for everyone.
If you're going to play without fans, I mean, look at the spots that, where Jordan Geronimo plays. You ever look at any highlights of Jordan Geronimo? He plays in prep schools up in Massachusetts, and they play on a court with literally maybe 3 rows of stands. Like, there's nobody there. It's just a giant box that they play in with two hoops, which I guess you could say is about every single basketball gym. But it legitimately is what it is. So
or be the Carrier Dome and like turn an indoor football stadium into a basketball
right.
stadium,
No, that's what I was saying.
increases the amount of stands actually
Yeah,
compared to a
exactly.
normal arena.
Yeah, but I mean, look, as I just felt like these guys would have wanted to play, and just played their heart out, whether there's fans there or not, and whether it was in a high school gym or not. You put 11-on-11 basketball teams and put two hoops down. They're going to play, and they're going to want to play. They're going to beat each other. I think I wish they would have been given the opportunity to do so. Now I understand, obviously, the idea of just canceling it. You can't not understand it, right? Like they're under the circumstances we're under, but it's just unfortunate that seniors like Devontae and Duran, who had this mark on their back as being the first class since 1972,
and they knew it too. They knew it was on their mind.
It was on their mind, and they had the ability. Actually, they were going to make the tournament. Let's be honest. They beat Nebraska. They were in on every single bracket matrix.
Joe Lenardi put them in.
Yeah,
barely, Joe Lenardi put them in.
Yeah, Oscar the Grouch
put them
in. Got out of his trash can and put them in. So they were in the tournament, and you know what? To me, I feel like the asterisks. They shouldn't even have an asterisk. They shouldn't even be in that category. They shouldn't be, because they made the tournament. They did. The game was never played, and it's unfortunate that it was never played. But to me, they made the tournament. It doesn't count, though. If we're going to count it, that means next year we're going undefeated, because that class graduated in 75. The next year was the 1976 national championship Hoosiers. So I don't think that.
Yeah. Speaking of, though, what did you think of? And again, I kind of understood it, but not as much as understanding a few other things. What did you think of the way that the NCAA said that they did not want to release the bracket because they didn't think, and I thought this was, I understood maybe not releasing it, but it was kind of the way that they were just like, yeah, we just don't feel comfortable putting out the best quality, basically because the conference tournaments weren't played. How did you feel when they came out pretty late on Sunday saying that we're not going to have a bracket selection?
I think that they probably attempted to make a bracket, and then we were like, we're too far apart on the 10, 11, 12 seeds to actually make a real bracket. Because, usually when you go into Selection Sunday, there's like 4 teams on the bubble where you're kind of like, 2 are going to get in, 2 are not, 2 are going to be upset, 2 are going to be happy, and they're going to be in the play-in games. This year, when you look at it, it's like there's still like 10 teams on the bubble. And you can't there's no concise bubble. And there's no, we didn't know any of the bid thieves yet, right? So there was a couple mid-major teams that probably would have gotten at large bids. We're looking at East Tennessee State. Well, I believe won their conference tournament, so it didn't matter. But like teams like East Tennessee State, BYU, for example, who would be at large bids if they didn't win their conference tournaments, they obviously make the bubble even larger and more teams are involved. So I understand them not bringing out a bracket. I'm disappointed because I want to see Indiana on there to be like, ha, I told you, right? But I get it, because it's just would have caused way too much controversy for a stupid bracket that was going to be obviously meaningless in what has turned into a crazy time. So,
yeah. And like you were talking about, especially with the seniors too, and I know I haven't done too much digging, but the NCAA has already granted, and I thought this was interesting because there are a couple sides to this. Remember, the NCAA has now granted spring sport players, seniors, an extra year of eligibility, and at first when you thought about this, and it almost seemed like a no-brainer. It's like, oh yeah, for sure, definitely give at least the spring sport. Winter would have to be a really large discussion just because they did play their entire regular season. Every single person played their whole regular season. It was just the people that got the extra right. games. But at least for spring season, it was like, yeah, for sure, that makes sense. But then when you think about it, it's like, then are you going, what about that sophomore or junior or freshman that was next in line to play shortstop on the IU baseball team? And then they would lose yet another year because they're going to lose this year playing because the season was canceled. Then next year they would lose it because that senior came back again, and then that's basically half of their entire career. So then does everyone get an extra year of eligibility? But then you go down to the incoming freshman, and that's like you're kind of doing the same thing to the incoming freshman, and then the classes 2 or 3 years down the road. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was also very quick for them to kind of pull that trigger. It was almost like kind of after that idea was being floated around. I think it was somewhat like less than 24 hours. The NCAA said spring sports seniors are going to get an extra year of eligibility, especially when there are. And again, I would love for everyone to have it, but then and again, I can't actually take credit for that thought, the like playing devil's advocate thought, but it was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense for 3 of the 4 classes on each team. If the seniors come back another year, it kind of messes up everyone else. So I don't know I was curious to think your thoughts, Matt, when you were hearing at least, especially the eligibility part that was going around all of this.
I get the eligibility part. I understand it. I think that was probably very low on the totem pole of, things that the NCAA was thinking about. I don't think they're thinking about the feelings of the second shortstop on IU. I don't think that's, what their main objective is. Should it be? Should they think about the athlete's feelings and wants and needs? Yes, I think that's what we yell at the NCAA about all the time, right? You pay the athletes. They're finally getting to that. They're getting around to it. They're taking their time, maybe an extra 20 years or so, but they're getting to it. But no, when you look at the positives versus the weighing the negatives of it, it's like, okay, well, a couple more sophomores and freshmen, want to transfer? Sure, probably. Is it unfortunate for them? Yes, because they thought they had a situation like, let's say we're talking about the shortstop at IU, right? We're not naming anybody. We're not calling anybody out, by the way. We're just hypothetically, there's a shortstop at IU.
That was just the first position in sport that came to my head. I don't know
why. Right. In a spring sport, especially. Hypothetically, this shortstop was promised playing time because our senior star shortstop is graduating and going on to hopefully play in the MLB at some point. And he's going to step into that role, and he's promised some playing time so he can get some, TV time for the upcoming MLB draft. So he can put his name into the draft and hopefully get drafted and fulfill his dreams of becoming a major league shortstop. And then that senior gets an extra year of eligibility granted, and he comes back. Yeah, it's disappointing. But I do think the positives of letting the seniors who didn't even have a season, right? Baseball played what, 5, 6, 7 games, and
it was about baseball. Softball was, I think, 2 to 3 weeks. Softball started a week earlier, so 2 to 3 weeks of games.
2 to 3 weeks of games, and
just under 10,
couple months season,
depending on
yeah. So like that's nothing, right? Like I can get why they wouldn't do basketball, because basketball, literally the only thing they didn't get to play was maybe at most one team didn't play 6 games remaining on their schedule. And that's unfortunate, but that's life, right? Some things get cut short that you really wanted to see to the end, to fruition. But if they don't do it with basketball, I understand it. But for the spring sports, like they didn't even get a season yet. Softball didn't get a season, and softball was supposed to be good this year. Baseball was supposed to be good this year. We're looking at baseball highlights. They're out there beating Mississippi State down in Ole Miss. They take baseball very seriously. College baseball in the state of Mississippi.
And I think we always, obviously, the bigger sport in at least a lot of the there are more fans attracted to the men's basketball side, and I think we sometimes even forget how the women was going to break all of their records this year with seeding, which how high of a seed they were going to get in the tournament, maybe win more than 1 or so games, since they had always the past couple of years, of course, like we've talked about recently on last year's episodes, how Terry Morin has been basically starting to break NCAA records just because the Hoosiers never make it to the NCAA tournament. They're always, and when they did, they were always on the 9, 10, 11 seed line. And when you get on that line, you play the number 1 or the number 2 seed in the second game, not the second weekend, the second game. The Hoosiers were going to be that team, the number 1, 2, 3, 4 type of seed. and playing a team on the other side, which means they could possibly get to the second weekend, which basically almost never ever happens to them. And we forget that side for the women's team. And now again, they're not losing much this year. We'll kind of dive into wrapping up the women's season when we kind of wrap up the men's season on a more detailed podcast, because we're going to have more than enough time now, since
There's
sports are going to be on a
nothing to
lull
do.
until August. We'll talk about that. But the women's basketball, again, not losing too many seniors. They're getting a really big transfer, so hopefully next year they can replicate things. But at least kind of wrapping up the eligibility thing again for the spring athletes, Matt. Again, at least as of Tuesday, March 17th. And this is why we preface when we're recording this podcast multiple times, just because news is very fluid, at least right now, and not just in sports world, but globally.
Sure.
There has not been many details given out, so I don't even know if they've even specifically specified with like if it's just the seniors or if everyone else. But I know they at least kind of talked about it as, hey, this is kind of a red shirt year, is how they kind of all put it for most of this, which makes a little bit of sense. How everyone kind of gets an extra year of red shirt eligibility.
That makes a lot of sense to me. But yeah, if we take this and they do it for basketball, right? Like they do prolong the seniors' career and they get to come back next year. How fun is that going to be? Next year's basketball season is going to be insane. We went from the weirdest season in college basketball history to probably the most competitive season in college basketball history next year, because you have 5 classes of players. So every team, you got to think, has depth at this point, which is insane for me. So, and think of teams like Michigan State, right, getting Cassius Winston back. IU gets to bring off Deron Davis and Devontae Green off the bench while starting Christian Lander. Like, how fun is that going to be to see Devontae with that backcourt? And Deron gets another year where he was just starting to get better, right? Like,
speaking of, I don't think, and I forget who to credit on Facebook. I think his first name was ironically Matt, but I forget who it was that kind of talked to Deron and Devontae. They haven't said anything either way, even if the winter sports do get an extra year or an extra something. It did not seem like they were interested in coming back. Basically,
yeah,
it seemed like they're ready to move on with their life, which is totally fine.
I think most seniors are going to be that way.
Probably, yeah. Because I mean, it's the end of their college career. They've got a professional obligation in whatever it is coming up in a couple of months.
Correct. Yeah, I'm sure that the basketball program, and I know they're probably sports marketing management. I know Deron's a sport marketing management because he's in my classes. Yep. But I think if they're in sports marketing management program, they got them pretty set up when they leave Bloomington, so they'll be taken well care of. But I still feel like they're looking at it now like, oh, maybe I won't do it, but I know the competitors in them are going to be like, I really want to come back if they have the opportunity to do so. I just think right now they're kind of a little bit depressed because they had a shot at the tournament. Like, these guys are all built up to go and compete. Like, that's what you do starting in, I don't know, 3rd grade, whenever they started basketball, playing professional organized basketball, right? All they want to do is go compete. This is what they love, right? And they just had that rug, their last shot, right? I don't think Devontae or Deron are going to be playing in the NBA anytime soon, but they had that last shot, that rug taken out right underneath them. Right when they were just getting to the end, right when they were getting to maybe the highlight of their careers, going and playing in the NCAA tournament, and maybe even making a run in March. We were talking about this team, getting the right seeding, and then you're looking at maybe an IU team that can make some noise. I think they thought the same thing. You'd look up and down the roster, and you look at all the office gifts that they were tweeting out. Whether it was Armand or Trace or Deron or Devontae or Jerome, they're all tweeting about it at each other, different disappointed office gifts because they were just all disappointed.
Let alone a Big Ten tournament potential, because we talked about good seeding and matchups, and Indiana was posed for good seedings and matchups in the Big Ten tournament. But
yeah, for sure. So I do think anything you see about them, anybody asking the athletes questions right now, take it with a little bit of grain of salt. It's a little bit emotional. maybe they haven't thought about it too much, and they haven't been enticed yet. There's no other option. The only real option right now is to move on and go on to a new career. But there very much could be an option in the next, God forbid, the NCAA likes to cancel things 24 hours after we have a podcast. So maybe tomorrow night, but maybe in the next weeks or coming months, they come up with a solution for this. So, things are very fluid, obviously, as you can tell. I mean, there's stuff happening right now. I'm sure I'm going to get off and look on Twitter and be like, huh, what just happened? So that's the age we're living in currently. But
I mean, it tells you when we're recording this podcast, Tom Brady is not officially, but as official as it could be, is going to sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Amazon is basically shutting down. And when Amazon's shutting down, it's also getting pretty serious besides essential medical supplies, basically. So
it's crazy stuff, man. This world is constantly changing. You just stay safe, guys. Like, we love you all of our listeners, even the ones that hate on me on Twitter. I see you guys,
which is okay. You got any,
okay. It's
got any wrap up comments on this specific part before we go into our new athletic director?
No, I'm just I in the fairy tale land of my brain would love to see Brenna Wise on a team next year with the women's basketball team with the transfer they're getting from Notre Dame. I'd love to see that. Of course,
something about those Notre Dame players coming to Indiana, and it's
I know.
Work out.
Look at Allie Patberg. It's been working out pretty well for us. I think having two Allie Patbergers on the team and a Brenna Wise would be fun. And then you look at our men's team. As Devontae is as infuriating as he is exciting to watch, and I feel like that's perfect for next year's team. I would love an infuriating, exciting player on that team.
He beat the NCAA tournament simulation. He had an upset. Number 11 Indiana beat number 6 BYU, and Devontae Green was the biggest reason for that tournament simulation. So Indiana would have gotten to a second game just because Devontae Green.
That's the funniest thing. That Twitter account cracks me up. Every time I see it, everybody's like all excited about or mad about their team losing. I'm like, you do know it's like some guy living in his bedroom, like on Ken Pom stats, running game statistics. That's all he's doing, and you're getting mad at him. Like, you're just giving him more press. Anyways, wrap it up. Next year would be a lot of fun, especially if the seniors go back. Like, look at teams like Kansas, like Udoka Azubuike would come in with their 5-star freshman coming into Kansas. You look at Michigan State having another year of Cassius Winston. You look at the teams like Dayton, or you look at teams like San Diego State, who had a great year with their seniors, right? And having them come back and adding, the freshmen that they were going to add this year. Like, not only would college basketball be deep, but it would be a lot more fun, and it would be redeeming to us as fans to get to watch these guys for another year and get to cherish them. And actually, like, I would watch so many more San Diego State games than I did because I thought, I'll get to watch them in March, right? Like, I'll get to watch their run in the tournament because they're a really good team.
When they're on TV too.
Right. Yeah. When they're on TV, and we didn't get a shot to watch them. We get to see, we're talking about BYU, Jamori Childs for BYU is a really good basketball player. And I was looking forward to seeing him play in the NCAA tournament. Didn't get to see him. I didn't get to watch enough of Dayton this year. I got to watch a little bit when they were in Maui, and thank God they were in Maui when we got to see them, because Obi Toppin was a treasure to watch him. But I wouldn't have seen him if it wasn't for some highlights on Twitter that I saw from the Dayton basketball account. But other than that, you don't really get to see them because they're not on national TV a lot. So all these like mid-major programs with all these really good players, like, coming back next year would be awesome. But I don't think Obi Toppin would be back for Dayton, because he'll be going to the NBA. But you get what I'm saying, right? Like, these teams like San Diego State or Gonzaga or whatever, like, these really good teams that are mid-majors that are deserving of a shot at a national championship and deserving of a national spotlight on them that they would get in the NCAA tournament aren't getting it this year. And I wish that they would have a second chance next year.
Which just makes it a little more frustrating, at least for the fan aspect, not necessarily for the more global aspect, just because, like you said, those more mid-major tournament teams were actually going to have a legit shot at being not necessarily a Cinderella team, because Dayton and San Diego State would not have been a Cinderella story just because they were actually good, but as in like a mid to low major program actually going far in the NCAA tournament doesn't happen very often. With this year being like the Dukes of the world, the UNCs and the Kansases of the world not being as good, and I should throw Kansas out of that sort of, but at least as good as they typically are, which would have made for a much more interesting tournament this year. But it
Right.
is what it is, and hopefully next year we'll have repeats of college basketball. Maybe not in the Big Ten. We could go for a little less competition, just a little bit, not too much, but just a little bit in the Big Ten, so that maybe Indiana can at least can get up a little farther. The most funny stat that I saw was
Most funny.
most funny. The funniest or most intriguing stat, I guess, was Indiana's Big Ten ranking in Archie's like first, second, third year has gone down every year, but Indiana getting to the tournament has gone up every year, and they would have gotten to the tournament this year. They were like, were they fifth or sixth their first year in Archie's tenure, and now they were 11th, and they would have made the NCAA tournament.
We were like sixth, I think.
Yeah, which still like sixth and then comfortably out of the tournament versus 11th and fairly comfortably in the tournament is very interesting. But
Weird
let's
times.
move on to our next part, and I'm going to take Nathan to one the week. And since there hasn't been much positives the last week, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Dolson because our new athletic director, Indiana's new athletic director, Scott Dolson, was just hired a few hours ago officially by the committee, and excuse me. We'll talk a little bit about his background, and you're going to see Indiana is very heavily invested in their own people. That's sometimes to a fault. I don't think this is a hire that's necessarily being blinders by just he went to IU. He's done a lot at IU. I think this is, and I'm going to get your comments personally, Matt, but just right away, I think this was a great hire for a couple of reasons, just because Fred Glass had been doing such a good job. Even if if you take out men's basketball, literally just that program, almost every single program in all of Indiana athletics has just gotten so much better under Fred Glass. And again, that's a very general statement, but I'm going to keep it a little general. Basically, most of the programs have gotten so much better. I don't want to get into too many specifics. We talked about that when
Sure.
Fred Glass retired. But this was his right hand man. So Scott Dolson was like you said, it's an IU guy, but he was a student manager in the 1980s under Bob Knight. He was a part of that team that won the 1987 national championship. 1989, he started working for the IU varsity club. So that was kind of his role, was just fundraising and alumni relationships. He worked there for 20 years up until 2009, and he actually went for when Fred Glass was hired. He was a finalist in 2008 for the athletic director position. So he's already been a finalist, and right after Fred Glass was officially hired, he became the deputy athletic director. So Fred Glass's right hand man, if you will, from 2009 up until current day. So it almost seems like this is what it should have been. Just the guy that is helping Fred Glass being the face of everything. This is the guy that's helped churn the wheel, help try and just get everything that's actually happened behind the scenes. This is one of the main guy that's had it going on. In Indiana athletics as a whole, not just one program with men's basketball, has continued to get better in the last 10 or 11 years since Fred Glass has been going there, and Scott Dolson is a huge part of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I can probably say the athletic program has never been in a healthier state as a whole than
Yeah,
it
if
is
you look
right
at
now.
every single
All
sport,
sports. I'm not talking about basketball. Trust me, I know basketball has been lagging behind all the other sports, which seems
just a little
redundant
bit. Yep.
because like that
Men's basketball.
it should be the one sport that is good. However, it is not currently, but it will be soon. I'm pretty sure of it. So I know Scott. I'll go into my little personal memoir of him. I was an intern for IU athletics. I was a tour guide for Assembly Hall and Cook Hall and Memorial Stadium. And I wasn't giving tours, I was working the front desk there. So if people had questions about tickets or seating or whatever, they needed to know where Buffalo's was. They came and asked me questions. So I'm working there probably 2-3 times a week, maybe even 5 days a week sometimes, just to get my hours in for my internship credit to graduate. And a couple of times this guy would come walking by, just ask me how I'm doing, talk to me a bunch. I'm a lowly intern who's just sitting there on my computer playing some Pokemon game on my computer when I probably should be doing homework because nobody's coming in. And he'd come by and sit there and talk to me, and we'd talk back, probably talk about 10, 15 minutes or whatever. I never really got his name, just walk away. And then one time he finished our weekly conversation. He walks off, and Kirk goes, "Oh, did you enjoy talking to Scott?" I went, "Scott?" I'm like, "I think I've talked to him a bunch. I guess he works here." He's like, "Yeah, dummy. He's the assistant athletic director, dummy." I'm like, "Oh," like I finally put two and two.
Lowly Matt intern.
Yeah, right. I put 2 and 2 together. Finally, I was like, I should have noticed that before. Now I feel stupid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm lowly intern, like literally the lowest person on top. I'm not even making IU any money, right? Like I'm not sitting there answering phone calls. I'm not doing ticket plans whatsoever. I'm just literally sitting there bringing people around the basketball arena, being like, "This is our wall of Olympians. This is Assembly Hall," and I bring you on the court. Like that's all I did. And he's like out there talking to me, like, and asking me questions about my experience and how it's going and just the ins and outs of my job. At first I thought it was kind of annoying, but then eventually I was like, this is awesome. Like this guy genuinely cares, and we developed a personal relationship, and it was great. And I really enjoyed it. And like you said, he was, Fred Glass's right-hand man. Scott was everywhere where Fred wasn't. So if Fred was somewhere, Scott was somewhere else. So, you'd see Fred, in the marching band, you get to kind of see the behind the scenes of what is happening. So you'd see Fred at every football game, right? And then probably like 10 minutes later, basically on a rotation, Scott would come walking around, and he'd be exactly where Fred just was, like kind of doing the same thing Fred was, but Fred's off doing somewhere else. So wherever Fred was, Scott was, which was really cool. He probably learned a lot under Fred, and Fred has obviously done great things for the athletic department, but I think this was I know this was obviously a no-brainer hire, and I think that's why Fred felt fine announcing that he was going to retire without announcing who his successor was going to be, because he already knew who his successor was.
Not just me.
Right. Yeah. He already knew who his successor was in Scott Dolson. So I think that the athletic department is in really good hands. Now, there was the Temple's athletic director that was getting looked at. I forget his name off the top of my head, but he was an recent IU grad and an IU football guy. But look, Scott's a former IU basketball manager, so everybody that complains about IU needing to hire a basketball guy, we've hired a basketball guy. I mean, he's a manager during the national championship run. That should count for something at least. So I think we've taken that off our backs. That monkey off our backs, and we should just get behind Scott, because this athletic program, while the basketball team might not represent it, is in a really good spot. I mean, look at football, right? We're all excited about football next year, whenever it starts, right? Like IU's football is looking really exciting. Women's basketball's never been in a better spot. Men's soccer is like constantly in the top 5. Swimming and diving had Lily King on it for 4 years as an Olympic gold medalist, was just chilling out. IU swimming and diving, and then our our swimming and diving head coach is for the men's and women's swimming team for the U.S. Olympics, and that's what you want, right? Like that's what you're looking for as an athletic program. And women's volleyball has almost never been in a better position than it is now, and it's getting bigger thanks to our coach Bayard. And like that athletic program's never been in a better spot. I've said it about 6 times since I've been talking about it, but I can't stress it enough. It really has not been in a better spot. And hopefully next year the basketball team turns the corner under Archie, and all of a sudden we're looking at a top 20 athletic department in the country, where I remember
continually growing at that.
Exactly. And when I started IU, as being a sport marketing management major, we looked at these things. We looked at these rankings when we talked about the athletic department, and we're down in the 50s. And we've slowly, every year that I have been in a class, been slowly climbing the rankings of, all right, profit margins. How much are we making? How much profit are we making versus how much do we spend? How much are we spending as an athletic department? How much are we making on TV contracts and TV deals and bowl game money? Like, how much are we making that? It's slowly been increasing every single year I've been at IU. So now we're approaching into the 30s and into the 20s, right? And we're competing against schools that are like powerhouses in football, right? Like Texas is the highest one, right? They have their own darn TV network, kind of like the Yankees, right? Texas, Oklahoma, there's a giant in football, Ohio State, Oregon, like all these schools that have some other connection outside or a historic dominance in football, which brings in the most money. We're slowly approaching these schools, and we're not a football school. I don't think anybody would lie to you and tell you that Indiana's a football school. We're not. We're like one of the highest ranked basketball schools up there with Duke and North Carolina. So if anybody wants to talk about a really good athletic department, IU's got one, and we're in good hands now with Scott Dolson.
Yeah, and I think the biggest point that I want to go on is when you're talking about him coming up to talk to you, and especially even talk to you about your ins and your outs of your job. When, like you said, it could be almost like the least interesting job per se with what you do, and the least, almost not necessarily the least important, because maybe some of those higher up guys might say that you're the face of it just because you talk to everyone. But like in terms of everything else that's running, you're pretty low on the totem pole. And he was still coming up to talk to you about exactly what you're doing and all of those little moments. And that shows you when there's no one around, there's no cameras around, it's literally just you and him, and he wants to come up and talk to you, just because you're helping out Indiana athletics. That just summarizes the kind of person he is.
One of the hardest working people that I've had the pleasure to talk to, had a personal relationship with. I know that my friend and supervisor, Kurt, will tell you the exact same thing. The leadership at the top of the athletic department has been was a pleasure for me to work with, and has been a pleasure to watch work as an IU fan. So I have nothing but good things to say, and hopeful thoughts about the hire.
Yeah, I don't even think hopeful. I think it's just going to continue upwards, and I think literally the way that they're transitioning with this, because I don't think there's going to be any bumps in the road. Fred Glass is going to stay. I think it's somewhat official that he's going to stay on through August 31st for a smooth transition. So he's going to overlap just the beginning of the academic year starting next year, so that Scott can get officially in place. I mean, they've known each other for decades anyway. So that's as much of, and again, it's an in-house hire, but if it was an outside hire, everyone would be saying home run hire basically. So it's a home run in-house hire. And again, like I said, that's not just because it was an Indiana guy. Look at all the stuff he was doing at Indiana. It just happened to be because he was at Indiana doing all that extra stuff.
For sure.
It's like how Kalen DeBoer was a home run hire. It's just that he wasn't doing it in Indiana. Now he's going to be a home run hire elsewhere. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt, because there is some still good and exciting news happening in the IU sports world, and we're just going to shift it over to the alumni. So give us your social media shout out of the week.
Yeah, you alluded to it. Now we're talking about NFL free agency today. That's been on the topic of everybody's mind.
Yep.
And Nate Sudfeld just signed a 1-year deal with the Eagles. My Eagles. Where is it? Right. No. There. I don't know. I can't do this. It's backward.
He's trying.
It's over my shoulder. You can see the eagle. Right.
He's trying to look at it in his.
There.
In his camera, he's doing a very good job at doing the backwards pointing. If you're listening,
it's
on the
awful.
podcast.
I can't do this. Anyways, the mirror pointing is terrible. So, anyways, yeah, you can see it right here. My Eagles. He's re-signed. Our backup QB is now back with us. My Nate Sudfeld. So good for Nate. Jordan Howard just went to the Dolphins, so he was on the Eagles. So the Eagles have Miles Sanders, so he's not going to be getting many touches of the ball. But the Dolphins, who have been making some splashes in free agency, are needing a running back because they were picking up running backs off the street last year.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, so Jordan's going to do a really good job in Miami. He'll have fun and be in wonderful weather like I was today when it was 80 degrees outside. So, yeah, I mean, the IU football players are making bank in the NFL as of recently, so good for them.
Yep, and the shout out goes to Adam Schefter, even though it's not an IU guy. This is his one of the few times that he works overload, and I don't know if I'd want to be like an Adam Schefter or an Adrian Wojnarowski. Just man, like especially when free agency hits, you're literally up for days straight because you have to stay up overnight trying to get all this like contact and like putting it out there. That'd be such a awful job. Anyway,
my phone already blows up as is, and like That's just from
Imagine
our
being the guy
Slack channel.
imagine being the guy
Yeah.
compiling all that, getting that, and then putting
No.
it out there. And so,
No,
um,
no, no.
but Indiana.HQ for Instagram for us, Twitter at Indiana HQ, and if you haven't followed the Hoosier Sound at the Hoosier Sound, go check us out. Especially since a lot of us might have a little bit extra time in the coming weeks. But we're just gonna wrap this up with a few updates, a few housekeeping updates, basically. So sadly, we're not going to be able to have the Hoosier sound offs for at least a couple months, just because the point of the Hoosier sound off is to give updates other than basically football and basketball, to talk about all those other sports that don't get as much media content, and give you updates like, hey, the women's team is on a 5 match winning streak. But obviously, there's no spring sports at all happening, so there's literally no news coming in and out. So we're gonna have to suspend those for a little bit. If you didn't know, we do have an email newsletter. We're gonna have to suspend those too, because a big part of that is talking about what happened the past week, and then also giving. I'm the one that does that, but I'll get the end. I'll give you like every single sports and who, like, what matchups they have this week and like when, basically. So it's all compiled at one spot. Because if you go to the Indiana website, you just have to click on each individual sport to find the schedules and everything. But some of those are going to have to be suspended just because there's no news to actually talk about. But so we'll apologize for those. We'll get them out when there's news coming out sometime, probably in the summer, I would assume, when recruiting's able to get back a little more. Football is going to start coming back, spring sports, even if it's like at a limited basis or a later basis. Just when the fall sports are able to start coming back up, we'll get you back on those and we'll keep you updated. But next week, we're going to have a really fun episode. Next week, definitely come back and listen. So basically, Assembly Call, where all the podcasters are kind of working together here. Assembly Call has gotten like 3 or 4 bracketologists to compile one bracket, like the selection committee would have done a couple nights ago. And I asked Jared, hey, can we use that bracket just to make it easier on all the listeners? Because I know if you listen to IU podcasts, if you're listening to the Hoosier Sound, you should be listening to Assembly Call already. We should be your second podcast, if not farther down the list. So you're going to hear them, and I didn't want to do this week. They have the bracket already made out, but they're going to do it on their normal show Thursday night. So I wanted to give them a shot, since they did all the work compiling the bracketologists and stuff. So they have a bracket. That's going to be the official bracket that we're going to go with. Next week, we're going to talk about that bracket like it was actually. We're just going to postpone it a week. Basically, we're going to get our bracket a week later on Sunday. We're going to talk about it like it's the actual NCAA bracket. Indiana is in it. He already sent it over to me. He's like, of course, it's a great idea. Send it to me right away. So that's going to be a fun episode next week, talking about basically, since 4 years ago, we would have been talking about it, a 4-year drought, a drought older than this podcast. Indiana making the tournament. So next week, we'll talk about the bracket and we'll have some fun with it. We'll post it. Assembly Call is already going to post it, so you can follow along and be like, oh, this is where they had this team at this seed, blah, blah, blah. So that's going to be next week. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. But that's about it for our housekeeping. So that's going to wrap it up for our 133rd show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you to that live audience, of course, for coming out and participating in the chat section. Always appreciate your support. News and updates, Twitter, especially during this time when information, not just in the sports world, but just globally, is coming out through there. I know you probably have a lot of updates coming in, but if you pop up Indiana HQ, if not the Hoosier Sound, we'll give you some of those, at least a little more IU relevant updates. But most importantly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review. Apple Podcasts, Facebook, usually the easiest ones. Tell a friend, share links. Your support is really how we grow this podcast, so we can reach all those passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Stay safe. Love you guys.